With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this Thursday, and I'm sorry for getting the show late. I don't know what's going on. I've been waiting for about 20 minutes for my guest to call in. They never did, so... And by the way, it's actually not Becky. Becky's usually pretty punctual about this stuff, but I can't get in touch with her either. She was going to come on a little bit later, and we had another guest scheduled because there is, of course, a big civil asset forfeiture bill that just broke, and it wound up passing the House. I don't think there's any word on it yet, whether or not it's passed the Senate. We will keep an eye on that. Hopefully we'll be able to get Mr. Mattson on tomorrow, and I will be keeping my eye on the phones. Hopefully he'll call in before too long, but for right now, unfortunately, we're kind of stuck in a holding pattern because of that, because there's, we don't, it happens. It's a live show. That's just the way that it goes sometimes, and so we're not going to sweat it. We are going to soldier on, and it's not like that is the only news going on in the state of Alabama. So thank you so much for joining us, regardless of how you're joining us, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook Live, Periscope, Twitter, however you're watching us. We appreciate it. We greatly appreciate you making us a part of your day every single day, making sure that you have all the best and latest information for what is going on right here in the state of Alabama. And even though we can't start with our weekly summary of what's going on in Alabama's Congress, we can start out with some local Alabama news that is going on right here and now. Because it was not long ago, I think it was about a day ago, maybe 2 days ago now, that this ad dropped, but there's been some fiery response to it. So there is an ad out by our own senator, which every time I say it, I get a sour taste in my mouth. The senator from the state of Alabama, Doug Jones. And there is a ad out specifically trying to bash him and make sure that he doesn't win re-election, which is interesting that it's happening this early. The ad itself doesn't surprise me. And granted, the production quality isn't super high. I mean, you could have put this together really within the span of about an hour, and this is where my knowledge of video editing does actually kind of come in handy. So it's not like a big elaborate thing. I don't know if it's running on any TVs right now, but it's a video ad that is aimed, and it looks like a TV ad. So I assume that it's running on a TV somewhere against Doug Jones. But what's surprising is that it's happening this early. I mean, the general election isn't for a long time. Remember that it's currently about to be June of 2019. This election doesn't happen until November of 2020. So we've got a ways to go before whoever the Republican nominee goes up against Doug Jones, and they're already doing anti-Doug Jones ads. Nothing wrong with it. Free country. They could have started doing it 2 years ago for all I care, especially considering it's against Doug Jones. I'm just saying it's a little odd that they've already kind of started putting this stuff together, but apparently people understand the importance of this Senate seat, and this is put together by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So it's a group specifically that looks at maintaining Republican control of the Senate, and so it makes sense that if you're looking at the Senate slot, Doug Jones is probably the single most vulnerable Democrat seat in the Senate this year. So should the Republicans be pouring money into it? Probably not, because there's so little chance that he'll win. But it makes sense that they're at least giving some attention to Doug Jones and what's going on with his agenda. So we'll go ahead and show, this is the clip that shows, this is the ad, so you can watch and sort of decide for yourself.
All the Democrat candidates have embraced radical ideas.
Welcome to the Democratic Party.
I support Senator Sanders' Medicare for All bill.
So for people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it.
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
Green New Deal.
Green New Deal
Promises economic security for all those who are unwilling to work.
That sounds like outright socialism.
Some kids are unwanted, so you kill them now and kill them later.
We will raise taxes. Yes, we will.
First thing I do is going to repeal this Trump tax cut.
Do you consider yourself a capitalist?
I think it's an interesting question. I am a socialist.
Sanders declared victory, writing, "We now have the most progressive platform in the history of the Democratic Party."
The Democratic Party is in crisis.
All right, so you can see that ad hits pretty hard, and it is aimed directly at people that would potentially be considering voting for Doug Jones. But there's a couple things that we need to ask about this, because anybody that's been listening to this program for any amount of time knows how I feel about Doug Jones, so I'm not going to go over the individual policy differences between he and I. Let's talk about the ad itself specifically. The first question we need to ask is it effective? Because when you're looking at any political ad, looking at the value of it and sort of gauging that is this something that is going to change hearts and minds, or at the very least, even if it's not changing anybody's mind, motivate somebody? So in other words, A, is this going to be something that has somebody that is sort of on the fence but maybe leaning towards voting for Doug Jones again? Is that person going to watch this ad and go, ooh, might need to go with a different route this time? Or is it going to affect somebody that is very much against Doug Jones, but not necessarily all that politically active and not all that likely to be motivated to get to the polls? I'd say on that one, probably not going to be much movement. And the only reason that I say that is this is a presidential election year. And so I very much doubt that you're going to have a whole lot of voters, even low information voters, that are going to be sitting there like, I don't really care who the president is, but I really don't want Doug Jones to be my senator again. And so because it is a presidential election year, which was a very, very bad luck of the draw moment for Jones, that he just happened to have his reelection on a year that the president is going to be elected, regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or somebody else. But because of that, and because there are going to be people out there motivated, and presidential election years are always bigger than election years in the midterms, there are going to be an awful lot of people out there that are going to be motivated to go out and vote against Doug Jones as a result. And so I don't think that this ad necessarily changes that very much. I think that most of the people that are motivated to vote against Jones are going to be motivated to vote against Jones more or less no matter what, because they're not going to stay home, considering they also have to decide who their next president is going to be. So I think that it's probably effective in maybe somebody that sees it, that is kind of on the fence and sees some of the very radical leftist things that Doug Jones has been associated with. Maybe that person goes, okay, maybe I should back off. Maybe this Doug Jones character isn't nearly as moderate as he tries to tell me that he is. I don't think it does a whole lot in terms of motivating people that are already against Doug Jones to get to the polls, because most of the people that actually care about that are already going to be at the polls anyway to vote for the president. So it's effective on one front. I don't know that it's all that effective on the other one. But this is something that, especially because it points to him as being basically lockstep with the Democrat Party, that at least some Alabamians are going to look at that, and because this is a very red state, are going to say, well, I don't want any part of Doug Jones. I'm just saying that a lot of those people probably already held that stance. The thing that would have made it, I think the thing that would have made it a little bit more effective would have been to intersperse it with quotes of Doug Jones himself. So instead of just showing a whole bunch of clips from people like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren and Nancy Pelosi, which, they're Democrats and they're part of the same party that Doug Jones is, I think that it would have been far more effective for them to intersperse that with actual quotes from Doug Jones. Doesn't necessarily have to be him talking, doesn't necessarily have to be video. It could have just been excerpts from him, something that he's written, something on his website with quotes underneath it. but it should be something with Doug Jones, because you wouldn't know that this was an anti-Doug Jones ad. You would just think it was a generic anti-Democrat ad if you were just watching this. Which brings me to my next point. Is this fair game? Is what we're seeing playing out actually fair game? Is this fair criticism of Doug Jones to connect him to the Democrat Party? And there are quite a few points where I think, yeah, 100% it's fair game. And one point that you'll notice is that they use a clip from John Rogers saying that we should go ahead and kill babies now or kill them later in the electric chair. That has a little bit more of a personal touch, because he's not just a generic Democrat. He's a Democrat from Alabama that has been a close personal friend of Doug Jones for decades. And so that does, I think, personalize it at least a little bit. Could it still be running a generic anti-Democrat ad? Sure. But that one ties it into Jones at least a little more closely than some of the other clips with Democrats that he only sort of has a loose connection to. But the policies, the proposals, a lot of the different things that we're talking about, that's 100% true. Because there is nothing in this ad that I think ties him to a stance that he wouldn't support. The only exception might be that you could say, well, it talks about the Green New Deal and Doug Jones voted against the Green New Deal. Yes, so did every Democrat senator. All of them. So I don't think that it would be fair to say, oh, well, see, he's actually against the Green New Deal. Well, Elizabeth Warren has come out and publicly supported the Green New Deal, but then voted against it in the Senate. And that's also true of Bernie Sanders. I mean, you're looking down the ballot, and every single Democrat senator voted against it. So I don't think that you can use that as an indicator that Doug Jones is not really a Democrat and not in lockstep with that party. By the way, you could say exactly the same thing for some of the other things that we're talking about here. For example, when it comes to abortion, and there's a reason this guy is referred to as Abortion Jones. When it comes to abortion, you could say, well, Doug Jones did break ranks with the Democrats and voted for the child protection bill that the Republicans put up, that after a botched abortion, that child has to be protected just like any other person in a medical procedure. Well, that's true. And at the time when that happened, I gave Doug Jones credit for that. He voted the correct way. That is accurate. And a lot of Democrats voted against it. But here's the thing. Do we really want to say that I'm against killing a child after it's born, that's a super high bar to clear? Because that really shouldn't be a radical idea. And I know that, unfortunately, that is seen as a radical idea in the Democrat Party now, because they're so insanely far to the left. They're so pro-abortion that they're fine with killing a baby even after it's been born, in some cases. But in Doug Jones' case, he did say, nope, that's a bridge too far. Once they're born, once they're actually out of the mother and by themselves, you have to treat them and try to make sure that they live just like you would in any other medical procedure. It's good. I'm not trying to take that away from Doug Jones. But let's not pretend that it's a giant feather in his cap to say, let's not kill children in hospitals. Let's not pretend that he's not radically pro-abortion and voted against an abortion ban after 25 weeks, which puts us as one of only 7 countries on Earth that allows for an abortion that late in the pregnancy. Let's not pretend that he's not wildly pro-abortion just because he's not for killing children that have already been born. I'm just saying, let's add a little perspective to this, and that's going to help us out here. But because of that, I really don't think that there's anything in this ad that is unfair or that is an attack on him, that when it's saying that he's in lockstep with the Democrat Party, that there's anything that is untrue about that, because Jones has proven himself to be first and foremost a Democrat Party loyalist. To kind of back this up, he vowed to back the Democrat who is running against Trump no matter who it is. Now, that's something that I don't do. I don't understand that, because regardless, you don't say who you're going to back until the time comes. That's just a dumb thing to do, and it makes him look very partisan. It makes him look very loyal to the Democrat Party because he is. He's saying, nope, doesn't matter. Hitler Jr. could run against Donald Trump, and I would still vote for him over Donald Trump, that no matter who the Democrat candidate is, don't care, still going to vote for him. And I would advise people on the right to do exactly the same thing. If this was Barack Obama running for re-election, then they're saying, you know what, I'm going to vote for whoever runs against Barack Obama. Even if they think that, you don't say it. So Doug Jones, very much a loyalist to the Democrat Party, and keep in mind, he is also the guy that ran 5 different fundraising ads, specifically outside of the state of Alabama. In other words, he targeted on social media, he targeted states that weren't Alabama. He made sure that those ads only ran for people that were logging on that were not in the state of Alabama. That's who these ads were targeted at. And you'll remember that we talked about this when it happened. And one of these ads said, quote, "The path to 51 seats goes through Alabama. If we want to take back the Senate, we have to make sure Doug Jones wins. Are you ready to win? Help Doug now." And the other 4 ads said pretty much the same thing. One mentioned specifically that Nate Silver is saying for the Democrats to take the Senate, you need Doug Jones and all this other stuff, which, by the way, is not untrue. But it's important to point out that Doug Jones' big pitch to the people that are funding his campaign, and by the way, most of his campaign funding comes outside the state of Alabama. Another study showed that. But Doug Jones's big pitch is, hey, you want the Democrat agenda? You go with Doug Jones. You want the Democrats' policies to get through? You want to be able to pass what the Democrats want to pass in the Senate? You got to go through Doug Jones. Doug Jones is your man if you want the Democrat agenda to be pushed through in the Senate. This is the case that he makes to his own donors. So this idea that, oh, foul play, you can't just play a whole bunch of clips of Doug Jones saying that Doug Jones is just a Democrat Party loyalist and show a bunch of clips that other Democrats said. Again, I think it would be more effective if you use some of Doug Jones' own quotes. But when you're looking at the record that Doug Jones has of being a party loyalist, there is absolutely no question that that is a fair attack. And it is fair to criticize the general Democrat policy and say, this is the kind of stuff that Doug Jones votes for and believes. Now, if he were a little bit more open about his policy stances, maybe I guess there would be some ads attacking his policies directly. But the point is, when it comes time for Senator Jones to sit down and cast his vote, he votes with the Democrats a vast majority of the time. And because of that, a general ad attacking the Democrat agenda and tying that agenda to Doug Jones, perfectly fair game in my opinion. And keep in mind, this is from Doug Jones' official fundraising page. Quote, "If we want to protect progress we've made, Doug Jones has to win 2020. The future of Medicare, Social Security, and our health care depends on it. You saw what happened when we came together in 2017. We can do it again. Will you step up and make sure Doug has the support he needs to win? Chip in now to support Doug Jones for the Senate." So, again, this is Doug Jones voicing his loyalty to the Democrat agenda. This is not Caleb editorializing or trying to tie him to something that he's not. This is on his own official website saying that he is for the Democrat agenda, and if you want the Democrat agenda to get through, you need to be donating to Doug Jones to make sure he wins that election. So no, an ad tying him to quotes that other Democrats have said that are saying he generally supports the Democrat agenda, 100% fair game. There's nothing at all dishonest or disingenuous about that. All right, let's go to the phones. We have a caller on line 1. Good afternoon. What's your name?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. So what's your take on all this?
Well, I mean, he's a yellow dog Democrat. I mean, he's guiding the bull as far as you can go. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer loving Democrat is the core of his being. And he's always been that. And he tried to present himself as not one so much in the election and in his campaign, but he is certainly one, and he is paid for by the Democrat Party.
Oh, for sure. Not only is his campaign funded, like we said, from outside sources, largely outside the state of Alabama and by Democrats, but you also have to look at the man's voting record, and you look at him, he deviates some, but I mean, this is not a Joe Manchin type Democrat. I mean, he's pretty much, he and Chuck Schumer, they vote pretty much the same all the time.
he is not a Howell Heflin Democrat. Now, that's
certainly
way
not.
before your time. But, you know, you had the Cotton State, the Bo Eagle Democrats, and you had those then that were very conservative at their core to a great degree. They had some Roosevelt tendencies, of course, but they were not the kind of people that you see now in the Democrat Party. I mean, the new agenda, the sexual agenda, the morality thing, and all of that. What is it, DGQXR, all of that?
Right, and you're
not that at all.
And you're drawing an important contrast there, that what you're talking about, the Dixiecrat, which is kind of how Doug Jones tried to present himself, that yes, I'm a Democrat, but I have Alabama values, I'll protect gun rights, that kind of thing. When he tried to present himself that way, he was hearkening back to that and hoping that people were going to think of a Dixiecrat, which typically speaking were very fiscally liberal. They liked big government spending and big government policies, but they were very socially conservative.
Yeah.
And so Doug Jones is just fiscally liberal and socially liberal. He's liberal on both sides.
Oh yeah, he could be Joe Biden running mate.
I don't think that Joe Biden would hesitate in that at all. In fact, there are people that believe, and I think Del Jackson was making this case up in Huntsville. There are people that believe that what Doug Jones is actually doing here, because he doesn't seem to be so dead set on winning re-election with some of the things that he's saying and some of the positions that he's made. I think that this is a viable theory, that what's actually going on here is that Doug Jones knows that he's not going to win the election, and so what he's doing is he's trying to move to the left and hoping that somebody beats Donald Trump for the presidency, and that what happens then is that he gets some kind of important cabinet position because he's no longer a senator, which at this point, it's kind of a desperate strategy, but it's not necessarily a bad or unfeasible strategy if you're in the Doug Jones camp.
Hey, well, listen, give me a percentage of, first of all, who do you think the nominee is going to be for the Republican side, and what do you think the future holds with regard to a percentage when all is said and done in the general election?
Well, recent polling has shown that, oddly enough, your best bet, at least the person that has the most votes on the right, and though it pains me to say it, is Roy Moore. Right now, he's leading the polls. Now, I think that in a general election, Roy Moore, and I made that stance very clear yesterday, that Roy Moore is the only candidate that even has a chance of losing to Doug Jones, so I think he's the worst possible candidate. But if you're looking at name recognition, which is the number one determining factor, Roy Moore is leading the pack by a pretty wide margin at this point.
He has more name recognition than Doug's?
This particular poll that I was looking at, it's the latest one that I could find, but it was before Tuberville formally announced.
Yeah, well, polls said that, Hillary was going to win in a landslide, too, so I don't pay a lot of attention to that.
Well, now, the polls were not that far off on that one because she did win the popular vote. She just lost in some key states. And again, polling's not an exact science. I'm not trying to say that it is. Right. But yeah, you're right. Because that was taken pre-Tuberville, Tuberville probably does have better name recognition than Roy Moore, or at least pretty close to it.
Well, then I'll ask your opinion on this. Who's more accurate, pollsters or weather people?
Well, now our news partners over at WSFA would definitely hope that I would say weather people, especially Josh Johnson. But
I think Josh Johnson's a lot smarter than pollsters.
I would concur with that. There's a lot more science involved in meteorology than polling, so
I would vote for Josh Johnson, actually.
Maybe Josh Johnson should announce. Maybe he could be our next senator. I don't know. He'd be better.
He might. He's pretty popular.
I mean,
like
heck of a he's a good communicator. I have no idea where he is politically, but I mean, he's got to be better than Doug Jones, I would think.
Well, yeah.
But anyway.
My partner at the house stays in the yard.
Well, that's breaking news. Thank you so much for your call, John from Millbrook. I appreciate it as always. Breaking news: the dark horse in this race, the pick from John from Millbrook, that is going to be Josh Johnson, who comes out of nowhere. Becomes the next senator from the state of Alabama. All right, so we've got a lot to cover today. There's a lot going on with the Mueller probe, for example. The Mueller had his press conference the other day, and that just completely blew up social media. So we're going to talk about that, and hopefully I can figure out what happened to my calling guest. If we can't get them today, maybe we can get them tomorrow. Maybe we'll try to reschedule that. Don't know. We'll see about that. We'll try to get that done. So we're going to take a break here, and we'll try to see if we can get something rolling there. Be back in just a second.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now it's time once again for another reading of the SJW Bible. Today's story is going to be about how Naaman was cured of his leprosy in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 8 through 14. And it says, "It happened when Elisha, the man and or woman of God, depending on how he identified at the time, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horse and his chariots, which were sustainably raised and emitted no greenhouse gases, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean.' Not that I'm implying that you were dirty just because you were a leper. That would be leper shaming. But Naaman was furious and went away, saying, 'Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Paphra and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him, saying, 'Wow, that Elisha guy is such a xenophobic jerk. Where does he get off implying that the rivers in Israel are better than the rivers in our country? That nationalist jerk probably believes in Israeli exceptionalism too.' So then God spoke to Naaman directly and said, 'Naaman, I am so sorry for being intolerant and not accommodating enough. I should never have asked you to have to go and do something to be cured. You believe in me, and since purification comes from faith only, I'll just go ahead and heal you right here and now.' And from that hour forward, his flesh was cured, and they all went out to try some local craft beer." Wow, so inspirational. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth. And welcome back, everybody. And do have an update. Not sure exactly what is going to come of this, but I did just get a message from Becky that there was a speech bill on the floor that just passed. So hopefully we'll be able to have her in, and we'll be keeping an eye on the phone. Hopefully we'll get an update on that. But nonetheless, keep it right here, and we will bring you that information as soon as it gets here. It's understandable, because what's going on right now is we are in the last week, the very last week of the congressional session. And so because of that, I'm sure it is a madhouse over there. So I don't begrudge Becky for forgetting about it. I'm sure that it is absolutely nuts, but this is going on right now as we're speaking, as we're live streaming. So hopefully we'll be able to get her or either get her or get Executive Director Mattson on at some point. If not, we'll continue on with our regularly scheduled programming. So what's going on here with the Mueller press conference? I did want to talk at least a little bit about this and sort of give my takeaway on it. First of all, the big media takeaway and sort of their reaction to that press conference that took place yesterday was that Mueller was saying that they were not sure that there was no obstruction. I was listening to Progress Network and several other people on the left. That was their big takeaway. That was the soundbite that everybody played, that what Mueller said is that if we had been absolutely sure that there was clearly no crime committed by the president, we would have said so. Which, by the way, should be news to absolutely nobody. If you've read the report, there was really nothing that blindsided you with what Robert Mueller said the other day. And what I do find odd is at the end of that same report, he said, by the way, the testimony stands for itself. And he was essentially calling on people not to get him to testify, which is also kind of funny, because if it stood for itself, then what was the point of having a press conference? But nonetheless, this is what's going on. And that quote that he was saying that if we had been absolutely sure that no crime was committed, we should have said so. There's a couple reasons why this is problematic. First of all, if you're looking at the report, that's essentially what they said on collusion. They said neither the president nor any American colluded with the Russian government and worked with them to try to, in any way, there was no criminal conspiracy, there was no quid pro quo. They couldn't find anything to connect not just President Trump, but any American to the Russian efforts to undermine our election system. And again, because that was their conclusion, they said, nope, there is absolutely no chance that this took place. We could not find anything connecting it to it. The reason that obstruction is a little different is because they did find things that kind of suggested that maybe Trump could have at least wanted to obstruct justice. Now, if that sounds insanely flimsy, that's because it is. But you're having to remember here that in one case, the case of Russian collusion, he's saying, we couldn't find anything. We couldn't even find supporting evidence. I mean, nothing. And when it comes to obstruction, we didn't find anything conclusive. We didn't find anything that would rise to the level of criminal activity. We found some things that made it look like maybe the president really wanted to obstruct justice, but we didn't find any criminal activity. That is different because what Mueller was saying is we found stuff, we just didn't find stuff that proved that there was obstruction of justice. He's saying in the Russia probe, we didn't even find stuff. There was no stuff. I mean, I know that's an oversimplification, but really that's what it all boils down to. And this really does bring me to a question that I have been thinking about. And I see no reason to sort of go back in the past and relive old fights that don't matter anymore. But I do think it's important to look at history and think about how can we go forward with this. And in this case, I think that where that may be useful is it's really not the DOJ's job to cast doubt on an innocent person. Or in the case that we're talking about here, a not guilty person. Because remember, there is a stark contrast between a court declaring you innocent and not guilty. Courts don't declare people innocent. That is not a thing. The way that it works is you are not guilty until they prove that you're guilty. You are presumed innocent until they can prove otherwise. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, not the defendant. And it's no different here. So what's really going on is that Mueller said there was nothing even corroborating the idea that there was Russian collusion. When it comes to obstruction, we at least found stuff that suggested that maybe there was some obstruction somewhere, but we couldn't find anything that would rise to the level of, okay, we think we can prove that he did something to obstruct justice. And so by saying that the president was not guilty, that's not necessarily an exoneration, to use Robert Mueller's term, and that's fair. That is legally correct for him to have said that we can't say with absolute certainty that there was absolutely no chance whatsoever that he obstructed justice, but we didn't find anything connecting him to it either. To put this into criminal terms of, let's say, a murder, they're saying, well, we can't say absolutely 100% with no shadow of a doubt that he didn't murder this person, but we couldn't find anything that connected him to the murder. That's essentially what's going on here. Now, maybe this person that had something against the person that was murdered. So maybe they had a reason to want that person dead. Okay, well, that looks bad. It makes the person look like a not nice person, but it still doesn't connect him in any way to the murder. And that's really what we're dealing with here. If you were to summarize exactly what's going on, and based on my interpretation of what Mueller was saying, I think that this is a pretty fair assessment of what happened. I think Mueller was saying he doesn't like Trump, but he cares more about the law than he cares about Trump. Because Mueller, at the end of the day, for all his misgivings, and there are some things, I really didn't like the fact that he did this extra press conference that he volunteered for. I don't like the way that he did it. I don't like the way that he kind of led credence to the idea of, well, what I was doing was gathering information and then laying out a case for impeachment, because that's not the DOJ's job. The DOJ is not intended to be a fact-finding or a fishing expedition to find stuff that makes people look bad so that Congress can do the dirty work of impeaching. That's not what the DOJ is supposed to be doing. They're supposed to say, is there evidence enough to convict? Is there not evidence enough to convict? And that's the end of it. But the problem here is that in that they were somewhat derelict in their duty, because even though I don't like what Robert Mueller said, at the end of the day, he does still care about the rule of law, and he essentially defaulted to, I found all this stuff, but there's no criminal conspiracy here. There's nothing that's a smoking gun that would have shown that Trump in any way obstructed justice, and therefore, I got to let it go. That's my job. I got the impression, based on what Mueller said and the way that he said it and the way that the report itself was laid out, and I said this earlier, that Mueller really doesn't like Trump, but he also refuses to break the law. And so as much as he doesn't like Trump, as much as he might like to see the guy impeached, and even he may have gone so far as to go over what was his allotted duty, in other words, what he was supposed to do as the special counsel, I think he exceeded that in basically finding a whole bunch of facts to help the Democrats sort of justify impeachment proceedings, which I don't think that this actually does that, and I'll get to that in a second. But the point is, I think that he actually went outside of what normally would have been considered appropriate for a special counsel. And that's not good. But I also think that he cares enough about the rule of law to say, but ultimately, even though I really kind of wanted to indict him, even though I really wanted to bring charges against him or recommend bringing charges against him, I couldn't. And that's really where I think we are right now. And another thing that's important to note, too, is that Mueller did really what should happen now is put the nail in the coffin on this discussion that, oh, well, William Barr was hiding stuff and William Barr was misrepresenting the original report and he was redacting the things that would actually rise to the criminal level. No. Mueller came out yesterday and said, essentially, this is a paraphrase because he had a lot more to say about it, but the long and short of it was, William Barr did everything right. There was nothing that mischaracterized what was going on. I didn't necessarily like how the media covered it, but when you all boil it down and distill it into one thought, it's William Barr handled that the way that he was supposed to. And so this idea that the Mueller report actually showed that Donald Trump did do things that were illegal and did obstruct justice, and William Barr just kind of hid that and swept it under the rug and showed everything else that didn't quite rise to that level, there's no truth to that. And Robert Mueller put that argument to bed. Are there going to be liberals that still make that argument because they despise Trump and think that's really what happened? Yeah, there probably will be stupid people that make that argument, but it's not true. And nobody should take a person making that argument at this point seriously. Because Robert Mueller put that to bed. He's the guy that wrote the report and said that the summary of the report that William Barr gave was accurate, and him releasing the full report, he handled it the way that he should have. Had no criticism for William Barr's handling of this. And so that really ought to put that to bed completely. Now, the fact that he had a press conference in the first place, I do think that it gave credence to this idea that Mueller really wants the Democrats to impeach. I think that that's accurate, because if he didn't, I don't think there would have been any reason for him to do this press conference. I can't come up with a motivation for him. Maybe just he gets annoyed at the way that the media has been handling it, or he wanted to clear some things up, but there's really nothing in this press conference that he didn't already say in the report. There was no new information. And so because of it, the way that he came out and the way that he tried to give credence to this theory that OWL, the oversight committee that came out with that ruling and opinion that you cannot indict a sitting president, he tried to give a little bit of credence to that theory, even though before he had said the opposite. And again, we'll get to that in a second as well. So I think that that's really the only reason that he would have come out and made mention of this and made the spectacle of himself, is that he really actually does want the Democrat House to move forward with impeachment proceedings. And I think that that is a strike against his character, that he would do that. But let's ask this question here, because I think that this is really the more important conversation that it seems to me virtually nobody is having. How should the DOJ handle high priority, high profile cases like this? Because in a lot of ways, it seems like what Robert Mueller was doing was pulling a James Comey. And by that I mean, he comes out, gives a very long list in detail of all the things that make the person in question look bad, and then says, but we're not recommending charges. Now, I'm genuinely serious about this because I don't think I have a right answer, or an answer that's completely correct at least. And maybe someone with a little more experience of this can call in 860-1440 if you want to. But I really am wondering if James Comey did the right thing in giving all the details about Hillary Clinton and her very obvious apparent breaking of the law as the Secretary of State, and then saying, but we don't think that this would rise to the level where we could actually convict her, and because we don't think that it'll quite reach that level, then we have to let her go. Now again, this is a summary that James Comey gave that I disagreed with. So I'm not sticking up for Hillary Clinton. Nobody misinterpret that. All I'm saying here is, should the DOJ's policy be to come out against these high-profile figures where there's a lot of public intrigue and give the details just so the American people have the chance to decide? Because remember, that was the rationale with the DOJ and giving that report with James Comey, is that they said, well, the American people need to be able to decide. They need to have this information so they can make a determination on whether or not this affects who they're going to vote for. Donald Trump is running in 2020. You could make the same argument there. So is it better to give the details and let the American people decide for themselves when it comes to elections? Or is it better to essentially treat the DOJ investigation as though it is, for example, a criminal case, to where those records are basically sealed once they're done? In other words, would it have been better for James Comey to come before I don't even remember who was addressing when he said that, I guess just doing a press conference like Robert Mueller did yesterday? Would it make more sense, and would it be better for our legal system for Comey to have come forward and said, we're not going to recommend criminal charges, and then walk off stage? One sentence. And would it be better for Robert Mueller to do the same thing? To come forward, and his report could have been less than a page long, say, we could not find anything that tied the president or any American to Russian collusion, and then underneath the next sentence, we found no reason to convict him or nothing that rises to the level of criminality for obstruction of justice. Is that a better system? Because I think you could make an argument for either system being better. Obviously, with the second option, you like transparency, but you also don't cast shade or cast doubt on a person that might be innocent. And so I don't know that that's not the better way to go. But nonetheless, I do think that there's arguments in favor or against both, but I just ask you to think about that. Because the answer that we have to that question, whatever we decide is really best, we need to stick to that standard. That whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or whoever else may be running in the future, that we stick to that one same standard, and so we don't have what's going on right here, a bunch of people that were glad that James Comey aired all the dirty laundry for Hillary Clinton because it hurt her in her bid to be elected president, but really upset that Robert Mueller gave all the details when it came to the president's behavior on obstruction of justice. Because we got to pick one standard and run with it. Otherwise, we can't refer to ourselves as being consistent. But anyway, essentially what it comes down to, and a lot of the details on this, and this is something that it's the reason that I really question Mueller's motives, because now we have to ask the question is the stuff in the Mueller report, which Mueller himself said now stands on its own, is that grounds for impeachment? And I contend no. And I'm not saying I contend no because I don't want the president impeached, because to be perfectly honest, we're being candid. If you gave me the option and there were no other unintended consequences, you say, would you be in favor of Donald Trump's impeachment? Just not whether or not he deserves it, just whether or not I would like for him to be impeached. Look, if I get President Mike Pence, I am 100% in favor of that. And I don't mean that to come off as callous or cold or whatever, but I just think he'd be a much better president. And so you're asking me personally of whether or not I'd be okay with Donald Trump being impeached. Personally, having him removed from office, I would be fine with that, because then we get President Pence. So even though I don't bear any malice towards the president, I also think that it would be a better option to have his vice president in his spot. So this is not something that the reason that I'm bringing all this up is just so you know, when I say I don't think this rises to the level of impeachment, it's not because I am dead set on Donald Trump staying in office, because I'm not. I'm just saying that looking at this case and looking at what traditionally has been used as an impeachment to a sitting president, I don't think that this even comes close, honestly, to the level of something that you should impeach somebody for. Because if the Russian collusion question is, nope, absolutely nothing, and there is no underlying crime, it's kind of hard to say somebody was trying to obstruct the judicial process. In other words, he was trying to keep the law. He was trying to keep the law off his back when he knows that he's innocent. And so that's one thing that I find a little bit odd in this whole debate. And here's another thing that you need to consider too. Basically, the big case that the Democrats are using now is that there were people that, Mueller specifically actually, that Trump wanted to fire and Trump wanted to get rid of. And that was the obstruction of justice. Well, there's a couple of reasons why that doesn't rise to not only not the level of criminality, I don't think that you could even make the case that it rises to the level of wanting to obstruct justice, or an effort to obstruct justice, rather. Because here's the thing. If we're, again, using the analogy with a criminal case, another criminal case, let's say that I go around and it's very well known that I tell people on a regular basis, man, I'd like to punch that guy in the face. Just some random guy, maybe that works with me or something like that. And I just over and over again say, boy, I would really like to punch somebody in the face. That means I'm not a nice person. That's not something that I should do, if nothing else, just to keep my own butt out of trouble, because if somebody does punch this guy in the face, they're going to, of course, be suspicious of me because I've said this over and over again. But here's the thing. Especially if the guy never gets punched in the face, they can't claim that I assaulted him. Thinking about doing a crime, and even wanting to do a crime, is very different than making an effort to commit a crime. Now, I don't necessarily even have to assault somebody or kill somebody or something like that. I could just conspire with other people and make a plan for that to happen. But even that doesn't happen. What we have here is a president that the guy's kind of a slave to his emotions. He is known for having a temper. He got very angry. He wanted the investigation to end because he thought it reflected badly on him. It reflected poorly on him and his presidential legacy. Because of that, he really, really wanted Robert Mueller gone. And I honestly don't blame him. But it's important for us to remember with hindsight that this is an innocent man that is getting very upset that for 2 years almost, there are people suggesting that he is in the can, he is a Russian asset. And he just wants this thing to be over. And so he, of course, he expressed his frustration to members of his staff and that kind of thing. But that's very different than saying, you know what? We're going to do everything we can. We're going to keep everything on lockdown. We're going to keep all of the files, all of the important documents. Nobody say anything. Don't cooperate. And by the way, we're going to fire Robert Mueller. That never happened. Now, did Trump sometimes say that he'd like to fire Mueller? Yeah. Was that a good thing? No. But it's also not grounds for impeachment. When you're talking about impeaching a president that was duly elected by the American people, you need to have a pretty high bar. I'm not saying impossibly high. I'm not saying that nobody should ever be impeached. It's a legitimate constitutional power. I'm just saying that the president thought about doing a bad thing, therefore let's impeach him. It's got to be higher than that. You can't just say the president thought about doing something that would have been a crime or might have been a crime, and because of that, we think that he needs to go. What this all boils down to is the Democrats sentenced Donald Trump before he even had a crime to be accused of. Before Russian collusion was even a thing. Before obstruction was even a thing. Before Mueller was the special counsel. Before James Comey was fired. Before all of that. Before the man was even president. They were saying, this man needs to be impeached. Maxine Waters is a perfect example of this, calling for the impeachment of President Trump before the inauguration even happened. You see, what happened is, they already had a sentence in mind. They already decided, again, to use an analogy with a different criminal procedure, we're going to hang him. And the way we're going to hang him is, well, we don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. They had a sentence, in this case impeachment, already in mind before they were even suspicious that he had committed a crime. And that's really the problem here is impeachment has always been the goal. The Democrats have just been scrambling for 2.5 years trying to figure out how to get there. It was never a question of, are we going to impeach him? For a lot of Democrats, it's been, we're going to impeach him, we just need to figure out a way to justify it. And that's not the way the criminal justice system works, thank goodness. But it's really not the way that we should operate as people. To decide because we don't like somebody, because we don't like their politics, or whatever else it may be, that we've decided we already want to do things to them, we already want to use the force of law against them, before we're even suspicious that they may have done something wrong. It's the height of personal bias. And the Democrats have been doing this since the beginning of his presidency, and that's the reason that you're seeing on this. So what all this boils down to is that Mueller and the Dems are desperately trying to punt the ball. Mueller is trying, it's kind of like hot potato. Well, I don't want it, you take it. And the Democrats are like, I don't want it, you take it. I don't want it, you take it. This game is going back and forth because the Democrats know, at least the smart Democrats know, that the American people are tired of this. They're sick of it. They want it to go away. This is driving up Trump's poll numbers right now. His poll numbers, I think, actually hit their peak last week or the week before in the midst of all this. And all this impeachment talk is just going to drive his numbers higher. And the Democrats know that the Senate's not going to do anything about it, that the Senate's not going to wind up impeaching the president. And so because of that, they understand that the only thing that impeachment proceedings are going to accomplish, the only thing that is going to do, is to drive Donald Trump's poll numbers up and basically guarantee that he gets reelected, or at least make it much more likely that he will. And so the intelligent Democrats, knowing that it's not going to result in him being removed from office, are saying, no, not a good idea. We're not going to move forward on impeachment just yet. That was essentially what was said of Nancy Pelosi and what was kind of implied by Nadler. And Nadler essentially has said that, okay, Mueller has put the ball in our court. And so this is what's going on. You have this game being played back and forth between Mueller and the Democrats. And one of the reasons Mueller showed up the other day is to definitively say, I'm not testifying. My findings speak for themselves. Use it. The ball is in your court. And the Democrats are saying, we don't want the ball in our court. We want you to take care of it so it doesn't hurt our reelection and our ambitions in that area. And so they're trying to throw this thing back and forth to one another, hoping that the other person is going to be the one that brings the hammer down on Trump. That's what I think is actually going on. That neither one of them want to be the one that actually does it, because they know in Mueller's case it'll be actually illegal. And in the Democrats' case, they realize it's going to be politically bad for them. And so neither one of them wants to be the one that actually puts the axe down on Trump, but they do want him to get axed. And so they're trying to put that burden on the other person and doing this sort of back and forth. But the simple truth of the matter is that there are several elected Democrats like Pelosi that don't want to actually impeach. And because of that, they're sort of stuck in this position where they're trying to play between their very radical base and the moderates. So what's going on here is that the Democrats want to appear very anti-Trump to their radical base that hates Trump and despises him and would do anything. I mean, you feel like, based on some of the way that they talk about him, that they would hire a hitman to kill him in some instances. I mean, some of these people are really off their rocker. The Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. And so the Democrats have to play to that base to sort of pacify them. But they also know that, especially in terms of impeachment, if they do impeach, it's going to be the same effect that I was talking about a second ago. It's going to drive up Trump's approval rating, because people in the middle are going to say, there's nothing here. This is just the Democrats playing politics, and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. So they're more likely now to vote for Trump. And so this is the game, and this is the reason the Democrats are in trouble, because they've allowed the radicals in their party to run things for so long that now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they don't try to impeach, then you're going to see the left go after the Democrats that don't want to impeach, like Nancy Pelosi. It already happened last night on Rachel Maddow. Maddow was essentially going after Pelosi and saying that she's not sufficiently liberal enough. She doesn't really have the American people's best interest in heart if she's not going to do absolutely everything she can to get rid of Trump. And so now you have the Democrats caught in this catch-22, where if they impeach, they satisfy their base, but basically ruin their chances with the moderates. And if they don't impeach, they ruin their chances. They don't ruin their chances with the moderates. The moderates still might vote for them, but their base is going to be very angry with them. Politically, if I'm caught in this conundrum, again, taking right and wrong and what side I'm on out of it completely, my recommendation is the base is not going to vote for Donald Trump, so it'd be best to gamble with their vote. And you would be best served not to impeach, so that even though the base is going to be mad at you, they're still going to turn out and vote against the Republicans. Whereas the moderates, you'll probably lose their vote if you actually move forward with impeachment. Personally, that's how I see the situation. If I were trying to keep the Democrats in power, that's what I would tell them to do. And that seems to be what's going on with Nancy Pelosi and Nadler and several other top Democrats that are saying, let's not impeach just yet. If we find more stuff, maybe. I don't know how they're going to find more stuff, because it seems like Mueller investigated everybody in Washington, D.C., and some other places about that. I mean, everybody and their mom seems like testified to that. So I don't know where they're going to find this new information to be able to impeach. But the point is, if they move forward with impeachment right now, that is not going to reflect well on the Democrats' re-election bid. And I also think that Nadler has very astutely figured out that Mueller is basically on their side. I mean, he may not have given them what they wanted because he couldn't, but that Mueller is essentially on their side, and if he doesn't want to testify, there's a good reason that he doesn't want to testify. And so that's the reason that Nadler seems to be, based on his comments, unwilling to bring Mueller back and force him to testify. And I think that's largely because he knows that under Democrat questioning, Mueller is not going to come off well. And the reason for that is Republicans could ask some very tough questions that would call into question the legitimacy of Robert Mueller's intentions and the report itself. For example, and this is just one of the questions that I think a Republican could ask that can make Mueller look as though he has ill intent towards the president and is not a unbiased arbiter of the law. All they would have to ask is, when did you know there was no collusion? Because obviously your report has two parts: Russian collusion and obstruction of justice. So when did you know there was no collusion? Because it seems to me that's when this whole thing should have ended. That's when your report should have been issued. The special counsel's office should have been, immediately abolished and shut down, just like it was a few weeks ago when Robert Mueller said, we're done with the investigation. That's what should have happened. And so once collusion was settled, how long did it take for you to shut down the investigation? Because here's the thing. If the answer is an exorbitant amount of time, in other words, it's months or even more than a year, that reflects really poorly on Mueller, because it paints him as somebody that really was out to get Trump. Because if he knew there was no collusion maybe 3-4 months into the investigation, and the whole rest of the time was just trying to find dirt on Trump so the Democrats might be able to impeach him, yeah, that does not paint Robert Mueller in a good light. And it pretty much guarantees what a lot of people have been speculating at. It pretty much ensures and it corroborates this theory that a lot of Republicans have had for a long time, which is Mueller really has it in for Trump, and he's dragging this thing out, trying to find something, going on a fishing expedition to try to find evidence against him, to use against him, possibly within, if not criminally, in the minds of the American people, hoping that it will affect the re-election. And if they can make that case, if the Republicans can make that case, that is going to be very much a win for the Republicans, and that may happen if Mueller testifies. Another question they could ask is, if you believed criminal conviction was impossible, why investigate? So this goes back to some of the things that he was saying in the press conference earlier, basically suggesting that because of that opinion by the DOJ, that you cannot indict a sitting president. That if that were the case, if you believe that this whole thing was impossible, that you could not indict a sitting president for crimes, what was the point of this investigation? Why did we go through all of this? Why were you looking so closely at President Trump and his administration and his transition team and his campaign? Why were you putting all that under a microscope if you believe that you could not have brought charges in front of him in the first place? Because if that's true, really the only possible answer is because I wanted to dig up dirt on him so the Democrats could impeach. Now, he won't word it that way, obviously, but it would be difficult for him to come up with an honest answer other than that. Maybe there is one that I'm not aware of, but that's going to be a very difficult question for Mueller if the Republicans are able to cross-examine him and question him. And finally, if they ask, what would have constituted obstruction? And since you said in some circumstances it would override that DOJ opinion that you couldn't indict a sitting president, then what would that look like? In other words, since you're saying now that you couldn't have brought charges against him and that your hands were tied, but you also told William Barr earlier that there would be some circumstances that would have overridden that, what could Trump have done, theoretically, to meet that plateau? Because that, to me, it's not so much a gotcha question as it is just interesting to see what Mueller would answer. Because if he's saying that, oh, those circumstances exist, well, then you have to have something in mind. And the question is, did Trump do that? Obviously, Mueller doesn't think he did. So it draws a contrast, and it calls attention to a contrast between what actually would have merited foregoing that rule and not foregoing that rule. And that's something that's important to sort of get inside the head of Robert Mueller and figure out, did he actually have it in for Trump, and is he actually calling that press conference and saying all these things about, well, my hands were tied, I couldn't convict him? Because if we're looking at a quote, and keep in mind, Robert Mueller himself said that William Barr handled it correctly. William Barr said that Mueller had told him, he, talking about Mueller, made it very clear several times that it was not his, that was not his position. He was not saying that, but for the OLC opinion, that's the one we were talking about, that you can't convict a sitting president, he would have found a crime. He made it clear that he had not made the determination that there was a crime. Okay, well, if that's true, and that's what Robert Mueller actually said, that it wasn't, that was not a determining factor, that was not the reason that he chose not to move forward with a crime, then the obvious follow-up question is, let's say that didn't exist. The Office of Legal Counsel opinion that just was gone. Let's say that wasn't there. Would you have recommended convicting him of a crime? And if Mueller's honest, he'll have to say no. I mean, no lawyer, no attorney, no prosecutor in America would look at the incredibly flimsy amount of evidence that they put together on obstruction and say, yeah, we think we can get a conviction out of this. No, there's no chance. And if Mueller is honest about that, and I assume that he will be, then he'll have to say that, and that looks really bad for this Democrat narrative of, well, what was really going on here is that Mueller would have brought criminal conviction, but there is that opinion. And so if he does that, if he is not in a controlled environment where he's actually being asked questions by Republicans and expected to answer them, well, then all of a sudden that deals pretty much a death blow to the Democrat narrative on this. And that's going to be something that they do not want. So I think the Democrats specifically do not want Robert Mueller to testify for exactly that reason. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
Today's Daily Dose of Stupid. The left is now calling for crackdowns on social media. And probably the stupidest thing about this, the thing that is the most hilarious about this, is their rationale is that the social media platforms themselves are engaged in intentionally undermining them somehow. So to give you a little bit of understanding of the background of the story, there was a video of Nancy Pelosi that was doctored. What they did was they slowed down the time so that when she spoke, it was really slow. Not slow enough to where it was obvious that it was edited, but just slow enough that she felt it looked like she was just a little bit senile or maybe even a little bit drunk and you know, she's kind of swaying a little bit. So this doctored video was put together seemingly to make Nancy Pelosi look bad. You could also, I guess, kind of interpret it as though just to make it look funny, because it does look funny. But the implication here, the idea is that it was put together specifically to fake people out into making people think that Nancy Pelosi was either drunk doing this interview or that she's really slow and not all that bright, whatever it may be. Which, first of all, I don't see that as being something that is incredibly damaging to Nancy Pelosi's reputation, because there's literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours of Nancy Pelosi speaking that is not this video on Facebook and YouTube. But nonetheless, it is wrong to make fake videos of people, and it's unfair, it's not correct. Just like somebody could take one of the videos from my episode, this episode today, and probably slow it down or speed it up and make me look bad or make me look worse than I actually am. It would be wrong for them to do that. It's wrong for them to do it with Nancy Pelosi. If you want to defeat Nancy Pelosi, do it on her ideas. Her ideas suck. It's not that hard. So if you want to politically bludgeon Nancy Pelosi, just play an unedited clip of her, and that pretty much takes care of itself. But nonetheless, this is what happened, and it is incorrect for somebody to do that. It's morally wrong for them to try to fake people out and to attack her on grounds like this. But in response to this, Nancy Pelosi actually goes after Facebook, and this is what that looked like.
There is a false video that the Republicans are putting out on Facebook. Now, this is self-serving of me to say, but I say it because I don't want other women say to me sometime, I would run, but I couldn't subject my family to what you go through. So we need you to run. So, you know, we have to get past that. But when something like Facebook says, I know this is false, but it's a lie, but we're showing it anyway. Well, to me, it says two things. One, that I was giving them the benefit of the doubt on Russia, but clearly I thought it was unwitting, but clearly they wittingly were accomplices and enablers of false information to go across Facebook.
Okay, so a couple of really big takeaways from that. First of all, she is suggesting that Republicans put this video out there. How does she know that? Because first of all, there is a pretty radical branch of her own party that doesn't like her very much. The people that follow the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world. The reason that she's saying that is because she kind of wants to drum up this imagery that it was the GOP that put it together. Or it was a Republican group, I don't know, in one of the states, like the Alabama GOP is here. The Alabama Republican Party. That it was some official capacity, that it was somebody that is actually with the Republicans that put this thing together and was lying about it. No, it was some random dude on the internet. Now, it could be somebody who is a member of the Republican Party. It could be somebody that considers themselves a Republican and votes for Republicans. But you know what else? It could also be an AOC supporter that really doesn't like Nancy Pelosi and wants to make her look bad. Nancy, you have no idea whether or not the people that did this is a Republican, and the reason that she brings this up, the reason that she says, oh, it was Republicans that put it out there, is because she wants to give people the impression that those evil, nasty, terrible Republicans, that it was, Mitch McConnell or something. Not that Mitch McConnell probably even knows how to use a computer because he's 1,000 years old, but that Mitch McConnell is the one that slowed the video down and put it out. That's the kind of impression that she's trying to put out there. That it was some official capacity that the Republicans were putting it out there by saying it was the Republicans. You have no idea whether it was the Republicans or not. It was some random dude on the internet. Even if it was somebody that considers himself more conservative, you're giving the wrong impression intentionally. So was it disingenuous for this person to slow down your words and misrepresent you in this way? Sure. But what you're doing is just as wrong. Implying that somebody put it out there when you don't know that or not. And secondly, and this is the bigger thing that is a problem, Pelosi is also saying that Facebook were willing conspirators with the Russians. That Facebook refusing to take this down even though they knew it was a fake, they knew it was incorrect, that means they were really working with Russia and they were trying to get Trump elected. Are you outside of your mind? Zuckerberg is a very liberal figure, and Silicon Valley as a whole is very left-leaning. In fact, Facebook has a long-standing tradition at this point. They have a long-standing record of censoring conservative voices. There was a Republican running in your own state, Nancy, for example, that was showing historic images of communism under Pol Pot, which, by the way, this wasn't just random. It was her family that was in Cambodia at the time, and Facebook straight up censored her. So this idea, and there was nothing wrong or fake about it, it was just showing some of the tragedy, some of the atrocities that took place under Pol Pot. It was no different than showing, the inside of Auschwitz or something like that. There's also when they went after Diamond and Silk. I mean, there's a long-standing history of Facebook censoring specifically conservative voices. By the way, including me. 3 times now I've been censored by Facebook. And it was every single time it was either politically or religious motivated. It was something that was either of political or religious nature. This is a common thing with Facebook. And so this assertion that somehow Facebook was secretly working to make sure that Trump won and they were working with the Russians to put misinformation out there, go home, Nancy, you're drunk. There's no semblance of logic anywhere in that statement. Silicon Valley is a notoriously left-leaning place. And it really brings me to my next point. This is something that Hillary Clinton also tried to hit on. First of all, suggesting Facebook is willingly conspiring with the Russians to hurt Nancy Pelosi is absurd. But Hillary Clinton's clip and her attack on Facebook really, I think, brings up the bigger point, the bigger picture here. So this was her commenting on this yesterday.
And similarly, the big social media platforms know their systems are being manipulated by foreign and domestic actors to sow division, promote extremism, and spread misinformation. But they won't get serious about cleaning up their platforms unless consumers demand it. And we saw why it's so important just last week, when Facebook refused to take down a fake video of Nancy Pelosi. It wasn't even a close call. The video is sexist trash. And YouTube took it down, but Facebook kept it up. So let's send a message to Facebook that those who are in Facebook's communities would really like Facebook to pay attention to false and doctored videos before we are flooded with them over the next months.
All right, so first of all, Hillary Clinton kind of shoots herself in the foot with making this argument, because the whole narrative that they're trying to push is that social media is being reckless. And then she also says, well, YouTube took it down, but Facebook kept it up. The fact that YouTube took it down, that they thought that that was somehow their responsibility to take down a doctored video of a Democrat congresswoman, is in and of itself evidence that the left has a problem with censoring people that are dissenting voices and they don't like. Now, again, I don't think that it's fair game to doctor a video to paint somebody in a bad light. That shouldn't be the way that people ought to operate. But it's also not YouTube or Facebook's responsibility to keep that from happening. They're not a news organization, they're a platform. For example, News Radio 1440. We're not a platform. Not everybody gets to speak. Despite what some callers try to convince people of on here, you don't automatically just get 5-10 minutes worth of mic time. We censor people because we try to bring you content that we think that you're going to like. And that's the reason that they have me and they have Kevin. And when we do have callers, it's completely up to us whether we take callers and whether or not, how long we keep them on. All of that is completely up to us because News Radio 1440 is a publisher. They create content and then they put it out there. We're not a platform. Not everybody gets to just show up and put whatever they want to on News Radio 1440. That, by the way, would bankrupt us because people could just put advertisements on here for free. But my point in all of that is to just give you an example. There is a stark contrast between getting critical, for example, if CNN or Fox News had put up this video that was a doctored video of Nancy Pelosi speaking and they did it to make her look bad. Okay, 100% fair game. It's even though they have a right to do it because they're protected by free speech, totally legitimate to claim that there was a problem there. Totally legitimate to say that the news organization was being disingenuous and they were intentionally trying to mislead people based on what the video showed and what they chose not to show. In other words, the unedited video were saying, hey, by the way, this video is slowed down a little bit. By not doing that, they were being disingenuous by attacking someone on those grounds. You know what else would be disingenuous? If, let's say, there was a video that seemed to show that there were a whole bunch of white Catholic school kids attacking a Native American, but when you look at it in full context, you see that that's not what happened at all. That would also be doctoring a video and being disingenuous with your coverage. And yet CNN did it and the left applauded and seemed to have no remorse whatsoever that these kids' lives were in many ways interrupted and negatively affected by CNN and other news organizations' reckless handling of a video that had been edited that changed the context of what was going on. You know what else I don't recall? And you may not have even remembered this story or seen it because it didn't get a whole lot of media coverage. That there was a, granted small, local TV affiliate that ran a doctored video of President Trump right before he addressed the nation from the White House to promote it. And they doctored it to make him look like he was licking his lips, and they slowed it down. Basically, a fancier version of exactly what happened to Nancy Pelosi, was slowing down the footage to make her look like she's a little bit off. And so when they did that, I don't remember the Democrats coming out, and this was an actual news organization, not a platform. I don't remember the Democrats coming out with fire and fury and saying that this needs to be dealt with. Now, another point that I think is a little odd, how is this sexist? Wrong, sure. How is it sexist? Can you only slow down the video of women? Is that somehow a statement? Can you not slow down video when it comes to men? Like, it's fair to say that the way that this video was handled was not correct and misleading. I don't see how you get sexism out of it. There is nothing here that implies in any way that this was done because Nancy Pelosi was a woman. But if you're Hillary Clinton, the only thing you know how to do is to scream sexism every time somebody does something that you don't like, and I guess that's how you wind up with thinking that somehow it's sexist. But nonetheless, Facebook ought to be an open platform, and if people want to put doctored videos up, that's what they should do. They should keep those videos up. It is not Facebook's job to police their own content. It would be literally impossible for Facebook, even with all their money, all their assets, all of that time, it would be impossible for them to police all of their content. They have so much of it. Treat them like they're an open platform. If people want to use that venue to post videos of themselves, I mean, as long as somebody's not engaged in something illegal, which this is not, then that's their business. The idea that the Democrats are pushing out there that these social media platforms need to crack down on people that do things that make them look bad, and that they should be the enforcement arm when it comes to misinformation, I never have understood that mentality. Granted, people shouldn't fall for misinformation. They should do their own homework, which is something I encourage people to do. But as far as saying that it is Facebook's responsibility to keep bad information out there, or it's Google's responsibility to keep doctored videos off of YouTube, no, that's not their job. They're just the platform. They don't control what's actually said on their platform, and they shouldn't be expected to. Make no mistake, what this all boils down to, what this is really about, is they are trying to convince social media to censor out voices of dissent. They've been trying to do this for a long time. I'm not going to revisit every news story. We've done a lot of segments on it. You can go back and watch them. You can go back and listen to them if you want to. But Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and the other big social media platforms, what is trying to be done here is the Democrats are trying to get them to crack down on voices of dissent. They've been doing it, trying to say that, well, Breitbart shouldn't be, and granted, I don't even like Breitbart, but they're saying Breitbart shouldn't be on Facebook. They've done it with Alex Jones, saying Alex Jones says things we don't like, so we should throw him off too. We've got to stop this idea of thinking that these platforms that are just open forums for everybody, that they need to crack down on it. The truth is, the reason the Democrats are taking this stance is because they want to do this before the lead up to the next election, and they are terrified of any media that doesn't support their narrative. They can't handle it because they're so used to the media covering for them. They're so used for the vast majority of the mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, not Huffington Post, Bloomberg, the other news network, HLN. They're so used to all of those organizations being in their pocket and running defense for them that it terrifies them to think that there are people like myself or, people like Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder that are on the internet constantly pointing out their bullcrap and saying, no, the way that they're saying it isn't true. They're terrified at the prospect of dissenting voices, and when people disagree with them, they can't handle it. They're trying to create an internet safe space. And that, at the end of the day, is what this is all really about. Let's go to the Chaplain's Report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Today's chaplain report comes from the book of Daniel. We are going to continue our series in Daniel. So just real quick, so you understand what's going on here, in Daniel chapter 8, there is a parable. And there is a great powerful goat, a ram, that has two horns, one slightly larger than the other. And he's very powerful. He goes wherever he wants to. He does whatever he wants. And then all of a sudden, he meets this shaggy goat. And this goat, instead of having one long horn and one short horn like the ram does, this goat has one big horn between its eyes. And it runs into this other goat, and the goat is slain. And we see where the interpretation of that comes in. That the goat with the two horns is the Medes and the Persians. And it's also important to remember that this is taking place, this prophecy is being heard before the Medes and the Persians are in power. That it predicted that there would be a great king and a lesser king of the Medes and the Persians, and that this goat would have free reign, do whatever he wanted to, before they took over Babylon. Because this parable, at least when Daniel saw it, whenever he saw this vision, it was in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So he didn't know that the Persians were going to take over, and yet that's the translation that we're getting from Daniel. And then we get the interpretation a little bit later. This comes in Daniel chapter 8, verses 21 through 22. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the 4 horns that arose in its place represent the 4 kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. Now, there's a couple of really important things to note about this. There is a big rarity that takes place in this explanation of the vision. Usually the explanations are incredibly vague, and while they give some specifics on the details, they don't usually give names or places. This particular prophecy is an exception because it talks about the goat with the horn between its eyes is Greece. And so it specifically names the place that we're talking about, which is very helpful to us in the interpretation. But another thing to note is that the Medes and the Persians had a great king and a lesser king, and for a while, they had free reign. They did what they wanted. But then Greece comes along, and the great horn is the first king. The reason that this is important is to understand that the conquest of Alexander the Great is the great horn. He's the one that goes throughout the world, takes down the Medes and the Persians, and eventually what happens in this parable is that great horn breaks, and the goat now has 4 lesser horns that have grown up. And so that's representative of what happened to Alexander the Great, because Alexander the Great, he didn't die like most kings, he died at a very young age, and controlled pretty much the known world before he was even 30 years old. And the fact that the Bible is prophesying about this decades before it happens, that Greece was eventually going to rise, that Alexander the Great was going to take over, and that his horn, the horn that represents him, is broken off because he dies young. And then you've got 4 other horns springing up from it, the 4 kingdoms that spring up from the wake of, essentially, Greece. What happened to Alexander the Great after he died? His empire was broken and divided up between his 4 generals. And so what we're seeing here is that God is predicting all of these very specific world events way before they happened. And this should come as a surprise to no one because, of course, God understands. He knows that this is what is going to eventually take place. It's just one more proof of the Scripture. And also a stern reminder that we have an amazing God that knows what is going to happen between men. He knows the affairs that the earth is going to see. And because of that, we should put our faith in Him. He knows what's coming. He knows what's around the corner. And when you have somebody that knows the way, it's important that you make sure that you're listening to their directions. This is one of the great proofs that God is the master of the universe and that he knows what's best for us. Because if he can tell these events years and years before they actually happen and be this accurate and this specific in it, then we know that he knows what's coming up next in our lives. And that it makes sense to trust in him to give us direction in what we should do in being obedient to him. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.